Reese.
Here.
Mr. Blundo.
Here.
Ms. Calderon.
Here.
Mrs. Huang.
Here.
Mr. Luisi. Mrs. Martin.
Here.
Mr. Stankus.
Here.
Ms. Steffens.
Here.
Mr. Weaver.
Here.
Where's the flag? Please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance. It's right there. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Adequate notice of this meeting has been provided by mailing copies of said notice to the record, filing copies of said notice with the municipal clerks of Hillsdale, Montvale, Rivervale, and Woodcliff Lake, and publishing said notice in the record on July 21st, 2023. We did already have our executive session, so now we will move on to routine matters. And first, we will have the superintendent's report by Ms. Spilati.
Thank you. The students are going to, when they give the report next meeting, or you guys give me a report this meeting? Next meeting, are going to highlight some of the really interesting things that have been happening in our schools over the last 2 or 3 weeks. But we've had a lot going on, and it's been, I think, a very energetic time. It really feels like spring. I was talking to a couple of teachers and a couple of our administrators who said, like, you know, that first form day really kind of just felt like there's different energy in the building. A couple of things that I did want to highlight to the board and the community. We've revisited, reopened, restarted, I would say, some of our international partnerships. So this is something that we had focused on pre-COVID. It's really largely been on pause until this year, but I wanted to just highlight a couple of things that have happened and that are happening. We had a group of students from India come, and specifically they wanted to work with our robotics team. They ended up actually coming to Hills throughout the school day as well, got to shadow some of our students throughout the day. Their teachers and administrators got to collaborate with our teachers and administrators. And while the crux of their trip was they wanted to learn from our robotics team, it ended up really being a really nice cultural exchange for the Hills community, and a really cool program for us to kind of think about. And it was nice to see that happening again. We also have upcoming, in about 2 weeks, we have a small delegation of teachers and students from Finland coming to visit primarily Valley, but they'll also be spending some time at Hills. They're going to be spending actually a week shadowing our teachers and our students. And this is part of a partnership that Miss Safari started as part of when she was a teaching fellow. And she started by going to Finland with a small group, and we've been doing an exchange kind of ever since, with a pause for COVID, and we're starting that back up again this year, which I'm really excited about, and I think is a really nice opportunity for our students to learn from other students, and also, you know, for us to kind of have that exchange. We were asked to participate in an upcoming delegation to Finland with the League of Innovative Schools that we're going to be considering. And we also have ongoing conversations about some exchanges in both Italy and France. So I just wanted to kind of point that out, because I think it's something that's really unique to our school and unique to our teachers and staff and students, and something that isn't always on the forefront, but is something that's been really cool that's been happening. We also have a delegation of students in about 3 weeks going to Taiwan. When they're in Taiwan, they're going to actually be partnering with a independent school in Taiwan to work with those teachers and students. So it's just a really neat thing to see happening. And from my perspective, it is not typical for high schools to engage in so much exchange. And I think it really helps with our student learning, our global presence. It's nice to see that we're a school that other schools in other countries want to visit, which is really cool. So I wanted to give an update on that. Thank you.
Thank you for that report, Ms. Bellotti. I would just like to add that one of the things that has been going on, Pascack Valley had their play this past week, And I did go this past weekend, and I did go to see it, and I thought it was wonderful. So congratulations to everyone who did the High School Musical play. And Pascack Hills has their play coming up this coming week. So whoever can get an opportunity to see that, that would be great. Next, we have the Finance Committee meeting report by Mr. Usami.
Good evening. In the absence of Mr. Luisi, I am giving this finance report. The Finance Committee met on March 13th. Mr. Luisi, Mr. Blundo, Mrs. Martin, Mrs. Varghese, Ms. Bellotti, and myself were in attendance. We went over the 2024-2025 tentative budget. I basically mentioned that it's been a very difficult budget due to rising costs and expenses, primarily from benefits and salaries and student transportation. But also some other factors was special education programs and related services. This is also a positive for us because of the fact that we have in-district special education programs, so that means that we don't send our students out to other programs where we would have to pay quite exorbitant tuitions for special education. In addition to that, there would be a lot more transportation costs. Also instructional, which is training and improvement, that had a lot to do with upgrades in software and also professional development. Also in athletics and co-curricular. In co-curricular, we added some clubs, and as far as athletics is concerned, there's a rising costs in officials and also in supply costs. So we talked about balancing the budget, and balancing the budget, like I said, this has been a very difficult budget. We did get an increase in state aid of $162,866. Unfortunately, I was anticipating more from state aid. However, we do have declining enrollment over the last several years, so that plays a factor in as far as what kind of increase we got. The increase is the last year of what they call S2, the law. In other words, we were one of the underfunded districts according to the funding formula. And so they increased our state aid over the last 7 years, and this will be the last year in 24-25. So with declining enrollment, I don't know what the future looks like as far as state aid is concerned. We also had to increase our budgeted fund balance by almost $450,000. That is excess surplus that we have that we put into the budget for 24-25. Also, we increased our maintenance reserve $100,000. We also added emergency reserve. That was to help to offset the health insurance increase. We're going to be adding $250,000 from the emergency reserve. Also, we're using a health care adjustment also to help offset health insurance increase. That will be in the total of $256,253, which will increase tax levy above 2% to 2.47%. We also had to increase the budgeted extraordinary aid by $100,000. We decreased capital reserve, but that's more of a function of the number of projects that we do. We're also not replacing 3 retiring certificated staff, and that's due to enrollment. So there are other ways to get around that and to be able to fully provide programs. As far as budget, other things that I just want to mention is that we will be continuing with the math and writing centers. That has gone over very well, and we want to continue that. We're also funding ice rental, pool rental, gymnastics rental, which we used to fund only half, but we will fully fund it. Also dance team uniforms and swim team supplies. We're also doing expanded use of AI training, since that is a very, very hot topic now. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Usami. Next, we have the minutes to resolve the minutes from the meeting for February 26, 2024. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please, Mr. Usami.
Mr. Blundo,
Abstain.
Ms. Calderon,
Yes.
Mrs. Huang,
Yes.
Mrs. Martin,
Yes.
Mr. Stankus,
Yes.
Ms. Steffens,
Yes.
Mr. Weaver,
Yes.
Mrs. Varghese.
Yes. Okay, next we have our student recognitions, and first we're going to start with the National Merit Scholarship finalists. Whereas the following students from Pascack Hills High School are finalists in the 2024 competition for National Merit Scholarship Awards. Ashley Chun, Olivia G. Adrienne Height. And Fred Lim. A semifinalist must fulfill several additional requirements and advance to the finalist level of the competition before being considered for a National Merit Scholarship. About 95%, over 15,000, of the semifinalists are expected to become finalists and receive a certificate of merit attesting to their distinguished performance in the competition. National Merit $2,500 scholarship winners are the finalists in each state judged to have the strongest combination of accomplishments, skills, and potential for success in rigorous college studies. Now therefore be it resolved that the Pascack Valley Regional High School District Board of Education recognize Ashley, Olivia, Adrienne, and Fred for their outstanding achievements. Next, we have the New Jersey All-State Wind Ensemble. Whereas Eddie Gersick, a junior at Pascack Valley High School, placed second in the state of New Jersey on tuba. He has been selected to perform with the New Jersey All-State Wind Ensemble. Now therefore be it resolved that the Pascack Valley Regional High School Board of Education recognize and commend Eddie for his outstanding achievement. Next, we have the STEM School of Excellence Awards. Whereas Pascack Hills High School and Pascack Valley High School have been awarded the 2023 to 2024 ITEEA International Technology and Engineering Educators Association STEM School of Excellence Award. This is a very prestigious award given out by the International Technology and Engineering Educators Association that recognizes outstanding schools for their commitment to providing a robust, integrative experience in STEM. This special designation was created to celebrate those schools whose teachers, administrators, and other stakeholders are providing a meaningful STEM education experience for students and to inspire others to learn effective best practices and instructional strategies to enhance their own programs. Now therefore be it resolved that the Pascack Valley Regional High School District Board of Education recognize our teachers, administrators, and all other stakeholders for their outstanding achievement. Now we have the first team all Bergen County, whereas the following students were selected to the first team all Bergen County. Selena Bucinich from Pascack Valley, first team all-country girls basketball, and she scored 1,000 career points. Hayden Hopper from Pascack Hills, first team all-county girls bowling. Patrick Kurtz from Pascack Valley, first team all-county indoor track. Jessica Malocha from Pascack Valley, first team all-county swimming. Benjamin Mandler from Pascack Hills, first team all-county pole vault. And Tyler Rothstein from Pascack Hills, first team all-county ice hockey. Now therefore be it resolved that the Pascack Valley Regional High School District Board of Education recognize and commend these students for their outstanding achievement. Before we move on, for the students that were recognized and their families, we understand if this is where you would like to leave. You are absolutely welcome to stay for the whole meeting, but I'm giving you an out. So if you'd like to take it, please do so. If you'd like to stay, we'd love to have you also. Next, we have our presentation for the auditorium project by GM Forcaro Architects.
So I'm going to preface them just very quickly to give the board or to give everyone a little bit of history, because we've had a couple of updates over the last month about the auditorium project. Some were through our facility committee, some were through full board updates, but I want to just sort of give a quick rundown so that everybody's on the same page and knows what Mr. and Mr. John Forcaro are going to be talking about right now. So maybe 5, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, there was a decision by the board to, set aside resources specifically to do renovations to both the Hills and the Valley auditoriums. And so obviously then COVID hits, we sort of put a pause on those major not necessary renovations for the short term. We then last year, May of 2022, so before I came aboard, we restarted this project. And we restarted this project basically by meeting with all of the stakeholders at both schools and kind of determining, what do we need to do to the auditoriums? And this is a little bit interesting because the Hills Auditorium needs to be asbestos abated. So there needs to be a renovation to the Hills Auditorium regardless of desire. There's like a necessary infrastructure update that needs to happen. So the thought was, let's pair the necessary asbestos update, which we're now ready to do, with this overall renovation project, which will eventually span the scope of both buildings. Go forward to last year when we started putting together proposals. So we started working with John Forcaro Engineers and Architects as well as Yas and Robert oversaw putting together some proposals. We put together a proposal basically for a renovated infrastructure, so looking at renovating ceilings, renovating floors, renovating seats, and then also renovating the lighting system. So you'll see in our auditorium right now, these are all incandescent lights. We don't have LED lights in our auditoriums, and we also rent a number of lights and sound for any productions that we do. Same thing for Hills. We do a lot of rentals for the sound and lighting systems when we put on productions. And so our focus really was on some cosmetic updates, some infrastructure updates to the ceilings that are necessary, and then some updates to our lighting and sound to make them safer, to make them so that we can actually use them instructionally for our students, and also to bring them forward. We haven't had updates to the auditoriums in a number of years, and the technology has changed substantially. We actually have a number of students who do participate in both our performing arts and theater programs who do go on to do this in college and beyond. So we want to make sure that we're creating a learning lab environment for them so that we can use this space instructionally. The other ask that we had was in both buildings so that when teachers want to use this space or administrators want to use this space, that they can very easily hook into the audiovisual of the space. And right now, that's really not the case. Here, we really need Mr. Sherman's expertise in kind of setting up the audiovisual. It's not just plug and play. The same at Hills is a little bit easier, but we still are looking for a little bit more usability of the space. And we think that if the space was more approachable with easier interfaces, that it would be used more. So that's kind of the background of where we started. We put together proposals. We went out to bid. We actually went to 3 failed bids, which means that we had 3 times tried to get a proposal on the project that didn't meet our budgetary expectations, meaning they came in too high. After that, we went to a process, and I'm not going to get into the details of this. If you guys have questions, Mr. Usami can definitely answer them. But we went into a process called negotiations, which basically means that we were able to pick the project apart into various scopes and then negotiate directly with subcontractors for those various scopes to ultimately get a lower price. And we were successful in that. Let's see here. So now let's fast forward to the last couple of months. So now we're in the finalization phase. And let me just check my notes really quickly here. So on February 23rd, so before our February board meeting, we had given an update to the full board that we were a little bit concerned that not all of our stakeholders were bought into the plan, and we wanted to make sure that if we're moving forward with the project, that all of the stakeholders who are going to use it feel comfortable with the project, and that we are actually meeting the needs that we say that we're going to meet. Because I'm up here saying we're meeting stakeholder needs, we want to make sure that that's the case and that that's true. At our facility committee meeting, right before our board meeting last month in February, Anthony and Matthew John Porcaro gave a presentation on the scope of the project, gave a little talk about how we kind of got to where we were, talked a little bit about how we could move that project forward. After that meeting, we actually, on the 29th of February, so a couple days later, we had another meeting with Matthew and Anthony where, actually, let me give you guys a better update here. So we actually talked a little bit about we brought in Robert Yass, the principals, our visual and performing arts directors. Anthony and Matthew John Porcaro brought in our lighting engineer. The lighting engineer actually brought with him a lighting engineer that works on Broadway and other high-end projects. We were able to actually do a little bit of a deep dive into the project, show some of the schematics, show some of the thought process behind it, and we're able to actually recognize that the proposal that we had was something that met everyone's needs. And so at our that Friday, I think I gave a full update to the board, basically saying we were able to meet with this group of stakeholders and our people. The outcome of the meeting was full support from the stakeholders, and that we were going to look to move the project forward, basically unchanged. So we're going to move the project forward, and that we would be able to be voting on this at our March 18th meeting, and that we would have Matthew and Anthony here to talk about the project a little bit, which I will turn it over to you guys in just a second. And then we gave another update, it looks like maybe last week, just to affirm to the board that we're still on track to move forward with the project. We are super excited about the project. I know that our theater department at both schools is very excited about the project. I know that the principals at both schools are very excited about the project. I see Mr. Whalen is in the audience with us today. I know that he's excited about moving forward with this project at Hills. So what I'm looking at right now is to have Matthew and Anthony give the full board just a very brief overview of what the project will entail. We're really looking right now, we're only focusing on Hills, even though the scope of the overall scope of the project will eventually look at both auditoriums. Right now, we're just talking about Hills. We're just approving Hills. They're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like. And then if the board members have any questions for the architects specifically, they're going to hang out for a second to answer questions. If not, they are likely going to depart. So just think about any questions that you have, or if you want them to stay while you think about what they said, just let us know. But I just wanted to give the board a heads up that this would be a great opportunity for board members to ask questions of our architects about any of the specifics, because they are very well versed in this and have spent a lot of time going over the details of it to make sure that it's exactly what our staff and our teams wanted. So Anthony and Matthew, thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to you.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. I'm Matthew Gianfrancaro. I'm here with Anthony Gianfrancaro. Thank you for that very good introduction, Ms. Bellotti. That was a very good summarization of how we got to where we are today. So I'm really just going to go over the scope of the project. As it was said, over at Hills, there is asbestos material in the ceiling. So that is one of the reasons why we're kind of starting off at that school. That needs to be abated. So the plan is for the general contractor for the renovations to go in once school is out, remove all the seats so that we have a clear space for the abatement. The abatement contractor will then come in, set up all his scaffolding, abate the ceiling, all the house lighting, at which point the general contractor will come back in. We're constructing a new sound and lighting booth down at the audience level. We are also putting epoxy underneath the seats, new carpeting throughout the rest of the space, new aisle lighting. For the ceiling, we're going back with a clouded ceiling, so it'll be wooden arched panels with new house lighting. We are addressing some issues at the front of the stage. There's some panels that have some wear and tear, so we're fixing up the front of the stage, putting a new hardwood floor in the backstage area. The front stage, I think, was more recently done. We are putting a new hoist beam up on the loft on, I guess, stage right. There's a loft area. Right now, the students, I think, are kind of using a ladder to, bring equipment up and down. So we're putting a hoist in that area so that no one has to actually carry something up and down a ladder. And then the other major part of the project is the theatrical sound and lighting. So as Ms. Bellotti said, we're going with a whole new, really soup to nuts lighting and sound packages. It's all new LED lighting. I won't go through every single item, but we have 48 spotlights, 18 color source bars, 2 movers, 19 cycs. We think the theater department's going to be very happy with it. It really is a world-class package. As far as sound goes, similarly, all new wireless microphones, stage boxes, a new sound board that will be in the sound booth. Everything is fully expandable. We feel that it'll meet the needs as far as kind of streamlining the system as well for the events that aren't quite as theatrical, say like an assembly. I think that pretty much covers it.
And then just new projector and screen.
Oh, as part of the audiovisual, we are also putting a new 15,000 lumen projector and a new projector screen as well. New sound booth, new ceiling, flooring, existing seats are going back in, and then really just the new ceiling, new sound and lighting packages. So I think that pretty much covers the scope.
Thank you. Do any board members have questions about the specifics or scope of the project?
I have a question.
Mhm.
What's the anticipated finish date?
So we're anticipating the general contractor to go in right after school gets out. He'll take out the seats. The asbestos abatement is scheduled to start on July 15th. That will be about a month. And then the GC will come back in. We anticipate, it is going to go into the school year. We anticipate middle of February, a completion date.
Question. First, a comment. I'd like to thank the directors, Performing Arts Department, for their feedback in working with you all to make sure that we get them and the students exactly what they need and creating what you said as a world-class state-of-the-art facility and something that I think our students really deserve. Our last meeting with the Facilities Committee, Ms. Bellotti had said that we're unchanged since that meeting, but I did notice from the sheet that we had left that meeting with to the finances on here, there appears to be a $50,000 difference. So am I correct in that there's a $50,000 difference? To be honest, not that it matters to me, because as we said in the meeting, I want to make sure everybody has exactly what they want, but there does appear to be a difference. So question, is there a difference, and what is that difference?
The difference is we are requiring so we ended, the project is kind of being split into two contractors. We have the general contractor and then the electrical contractor who will be doing everything electrical, house lighting, theatrical lighting, and sound. We always, in a project like this, require the general contractor, who typically, the electrical is really typically more of a sub to them. We always require that they provide us with a performance bond. In the event that something happens, they go under, we can rely on the bond. We are also requiring the electrical contractor to provide a performance bond as well, at the recommendation of the board attorney. So that is what that $50,000 is a bond for the general, or the electrical contractor.
Gotcha. You had also just made reference to the wireless microphones. Are we buying that? Are we not? I know that there was some question in the last meeting.
There are, I believe it's 10 wireless headset mics and 2 wireless handheld mics within the package.
All right. And then the asbestos is not included in this cost. That's separate cost, right?
That's a separate cost, yes.
Do we know how much that asbestos removal cost is?
They have to go to bid. So the environmental consultant's going to go out to bid for that.
Ballpark?
Ballpark around 350,000.
And assuming that's been
Wait a minute, I
budgeted for.
shouldn't-
You should- Because it's going out to bid right now, we can't hypothesize on what
All
the
right,
cost
so let
of
me ask the question this way. If we go out to bid, and we saw what happened when we went out to bid with the auditorium, we had to go back and renegotiate, and to Ms. Steffen's question about timelines, is there any way that going out to bid could potentially hold up the start of this project?
I don't believe that will happen.
Okay. Let me ask a follow-up to that. If it did happen, I'm assuming the asbestos removal could only happen when the students are not in the building. So could that potentially push it off a whole year if it has to be done in the summertime?
I don't see an instance where we would hold it up like that.
Okay.
Do you want to go into an occupied abatement?
Anyone?
If, just one thing about the asbestos. My understanding is, again, that's being bid separately, but my understanding is that it is being bid as an occupied removal. So there are 2 ways to do asbestos, unoccupied and occupied. What it entails is a little bit more monitoring when you do an occupied. So if it should get pushed back, it wouldn't be pushing it back a whole year. At one time, as this process was going through, and we were going through negotiation, the time frame kind of kept moving. As we were moving along, we were considering an occupied asbestos removal. So it can be done that way.
Great.
So
Thank
we
you.
don't see it being extended for any significant time. Now that we iron this out, again, as we mentioned at the facilities meeting, one thing that we're hoping is that we could, get this contract put out so that we can lock in these dates.
Any further questions, discussions?
I just have a question to the administration. What are we doing with the musical for next year for Hills? Are we rerouting it here? What are we doing?
Well, the plan is for the construction to be finished in time for the musical. So they're looking at wrapping up completely by February, and the musical is typically performed in March. So theoretically, the goal would be for them to perform it in the new space. Same thing with some of our spring concerts and some of the other musical events that we have. We have like a Chai-Am ceremony. Our auditorium is used by the middle school. We do it's like a middle school band where it's middle schools and our students play together. I think that's this coming weekend and the weekend after. We're trying to actually have all those actually still happen in the spring. That's our goal. If we have to change that, we'll work with the theater department to make an adjustment. That's not ideal though.
And there's nothing in the fall that would have to be reallocated?
The fall play. Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's
Okay.
fair. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any further questions, discussion? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you're good.
Okay, next we have comments from the public. Citizens are invited to make comments regarding agenda items and are limited to 3 minutes according to the Pascack Valley Regional High School District Board of Education Policy Number 0167. Persons wishing to speak must, upon being recognized, rise, sign in, and state their name, town of residence, and which agenda items they are referencing. So please come to the podium. Mr. Wyland.
I'm Tim Wheeland. I'm the very proud principal of Pascack Hills and also a Rivervale parent. So a couple things. First off, we have been trying to figure out how we could manage losing the auditorium for what is half a school year, both here and at Valley. And our music departments, our theater departments have been very creative with how we might be able to work together on some things, how we can run rehearsals in the cafeteria and in the choir room and things like that. So behind the scenes, we've tried to work that out, knowing that for our seniors next year, if the board approves this, that they won't have an auditorium for their fall play at Hills, but that they will be the first to have the new lights and sound for their musical in the spring. So it's kind of, you have to do it at some point, and having that balance there. Even from the summer perspective, our extended school year tends to use the auditorium when they're there. This year, they won't be able to use it for the summer, but we're okay with that. We have figured out alternate plans for how we can do that. I just want to give a very quick background. Ms. Bellotti mentioned that the Board of Ed first started talking about this project 7 years ago. This is my 12th year at Pascack Hills. Struggles and frustrations with our sound and lighting have been there since I've been there, and I think since before that. And nothing's worse than seeing our kids put in countless hours and then get on stage and have an issue with sound where you don't hear that solo or that line. This would take those concerns away. Our theater departments have done a phenomenal job with kind of what they have, and in supplementing that by renting things. Anybody that was here over the weekend and saw High School Musical, if you look up, there were a lot more lights up there over the weekend than there are now because they had to rent those and pull those in. And I think it'll be great for our kids and for our school, not only in the theater program, but for the concerts, for the other things that the auditorium gets used for. We use it quite a bit, and to have this renovation would be great for the school for countless reasons. And as a plug, if you want to come see what will hopefully be the last musical with old lighting and old sound, that's coming up this weekend at Hills. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wheeland. Anyone else like to make a comment? You can come to the podium. Sign in and state your name, your town of residence, and which agenda item that you're referencing, please.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Mandler from Wycliffe Lake. I actually wanted to just build on Mr. Whelan's comments from Pascack Hills. So I'm a parent of a student in the theater program, and I'm really happy to hear about all of the improvements. Hopefully, I mean, my daughter is going to be a senior next year, so I have, mixed feelings about missing half a year of theater. But as we're talking about making all these like technical improvements to the physical theater, I wanted to just put in my comment that I would really like to see more improvement of the more academic aspect of the theater program at Pascack Hills, where I feel like there could be a lot more in the curriculum for theater and arts that we don't really have at this time. And I really feel like that would be a great complement to, this improvement of the actual physical theater. So I'd really love to see that something be added to the curriculum and to having teachers and more like representation in the faculty for the theater program. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. So let's move on to the next item in our agenda, policy. And there are 2 consent agenda items. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Usami, roll call?
Mr. Blundo,
Yes.
Ms. Calderon,
Yes.
Mrs. Huang,
Yes.
Mrs. Martin,
Yes.
Mr. Stankus,
Yes.
Ms. Steffens,
Yes.
Mr. Weaver,
Abstain 1. Abstain number 2, policy 2431.4 and regulation 2431.4. Yes to all other policies.
Mrs. Varghese.
Yes. Next, we have education, for which we have 3 consent agenda items. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please, Mr. Usami?
Mr. Blundo,
Yes.
Ms. Calderon,
Yes.
Mrs. Huang,
Yes.
Mrs. Martin,
Yes.
Mr. Stankus,
Yes.
Ms. Steffens,
Yes.
Mr. Weaver,
Yes.
Mrs. Varghese.
Yes. Next, we have human resources, and there are 18 consent agenda items. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please, Mr. Usami.
Mr. Blundo,
Yes.
Ms. Calderon,
Yes.
Mrs. Huang,
Yes.
Mrs. Martin,
Yes.
Mr. Stankus,
Yes.
Ms. Steffens,
Yes.
Mr. Weaver,
Yes.
Mrs. Varghese.
Yes. Next, we have finance, for which there are 28 consent agenda items. Number 25 that is on the agenda will be removed today. I think we're still waiting for some bids,
Waiting for some paperwork.
and it will be on the agenda on April 8th. So excluding item number 25, do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please, Mr. Usami.
Mr. Blundo,
Yes.
Ms. Calderon,
Yes.
Mrs. Huang,
Yes.
Mrs. Martin,
Yes.
Mr. Stankus,
Yes.
Ms. Steffens,
Yes.
Mr. Weaver,
Yes.
Mrs. Varghese.
Yes. Next, we have old business. Any discussion? We see the monthly suspension report. Okay, moving on to
Oh,
new.
yep, I got a few items I'd like to
Sure.
throw out there for the world. So number 1, just in speaking to different organizations, town-based organizations who are utilizing our spaces in the spring. I know we had some discussion, I don't know, maybe it was a couple years back with regard to both Hills and Valley and an outside organization that was utilizing the space and not paying fees for it due to an agreement that we couldn't find existed. So with regard to policy for providing facility usage to organizations, I'd like to be sure that our schools are making sure that we're following the policy on how facility use and field time are to be distributed. I know in speaking with one organization, they received calendars from both schools. One was open, one was already filled up with an outside organization, so they were a bit restricted in their use. So that's the first piece of that, making sure that our town-based organizations have first crack at any time that's out there. And then the second thing is just in follow-up to what we had talked about years ago when we revisited the policy. I would like to see if it exists, outside organizations, how much time they've used the facilities, and how much they paid for that usage.
Do you mean you'd like to see like a report?
Yes. And I can go into more detail offline with Mr. Usami, if it's necessary. But it is in follow-up to a situation we had discussed a few years ago and had revised the policy on. And an organization that was on the calendar before other teams town-based teams had a crack at it. And again, that's just been reported to me from one of our town-based organizations. So that was the first piece. The second piece, thrilled to hear that we're going to be investing more money into things like swimming and ice hockey to help reduce the amount of out-of-pocket expense to families. And picking up the full cost of rentals. There might have been one or two more on there. I know going back to October 17th, when we had received an email from a parent at Valley specific to the football program and Valley concessions, that email had said that, Valley concessions stand that fosters inequality between the two schools and limits the ability to financially support the booster programs, which generate tens of thousands of dollars. So in follow-up to that email, I just asked administration through the finance committee if we could get a better understanding of what costs are being passed off to families across the board, all extracurriculars, sports, clubs, activities. So I sent that on October 19th. The reply back from Ms. Bellotti was that we would get an update with all of those items in the November meeting for facilities. There was no follow-up to that. I had asked again in the February 5th Board of Ed meeting if we could get that information. And I had asked again in a follow-up email on February 6th with, the hope of understanding what costs are we passing on to our families and how can we, from a budgeting standpoint, try to offset some of that. And also, when we have a particular group communicating inequalities, everybody's competing for the same amount of, or the same pool of money when they fundraise, right? So the question then becomes, are certain groups doing it more successfully than others? And are certain families with certain children participating in certain activities paying more maybe because their group isn't fundraising as well, right? So it would help to have an understanding of all of our clubs and activities, what out-of-pocket expenses are asked, how many students participate, so in total, how much is being collected from those students and families, and then how much does that group fundraise? Right, and that would kind of give us a clear picture across both schools of what inequalities do exist that we could maybe address from a finance perspective. So, I mean, just the fact that that follow-up never happened is a little bit disappointing. And so if at some point we could get that, that would be appreciated. And then the last thing is just on the auditorium. And not on the auditorium, the locker rooms. So my thanks to administration for arranging for that presentation, which I think was very helpful, because it's something we've talked about for quite some time, or maybe I've talked about for quite some time, right? However, I do think we presented an incomplete picture to the community, because I was in a meeting with a group of people from a particular town who said, you guys are going out to referendum for a girls' locker room at Hills, right? And that's kind of a sentiment that Ms. Martin had echoed at the last meeting. But as Mr. Blundo can maybe remember back to when we met on this in December of '22, we talked about the locker room being part of a bigger referendum to ensure that we were meeting and addressing needs at both buildings. So I think that was the first piece that I wanted to make sure that the community understands. And again, that piece isn't until 2028. And I think when I look back at my notes, the reality is by the time that project gets completed, you're probably looking at 2030 the best, by the time like shovels go into the ground, if and when they do. So I guess a few questions that I have for administration are, in the February 9th Friday update, it said we possess full plans for several options. No additional planning is needed. So I know we were presented two options. One with a renovation of the existing space and an addition above the wrestling room on the second floor. That was one option. And the second option was renovation of the existing space and a facility up at the field. I don't know of any options that exist beyond that. So if there are, and those could be shared, that would be appreciated. I think the part that concerned me was no additional planning is needed. Like my understanding back when we talked about this in December 22 was this was just, we were starting conversation. There was reference made to the fact that when construction had been done back at Hills, there may have been plans that the athletic director asked for at the time, Phil Paspalis, that spoke to adding locker rooms on the exterior. You know, at the time when we had that meeting, we didn't own the property now next door. I had asked in a follow-up meeting or at the last meeting, and then in follow-up, specific to room usage. And my concern with that request at the last meeting was I was speaking to room usage from a broader, we're looking at the entire district and need, rather than something specific to just the girls' locker room. So I think the fact that we're then taking votes on whether or not we're going to do a room usage study, I mean, if we're looking at a big referendum, we should be looking at room usage across the entire district regardless. And I think if you saw from what Dan had shared a few years back, there's unused space up to 13, 14, 15 classrooms per period. All right, I don't want to get into the specifics of it, but you know, there's room. And Dan had shared with us, we could probably fit over 1,000 students in this building comfortably. Right now, we're probably at about like 800, right? So just the reasons why I bring those up is because I feel like we talked about the girls' locker room as these are the plans, this is it. But those conversations, and Mr. Blundo, correct me if I'm wrong, I interpreted them back in December 22 as this is a starting point for bigger conversation. And I'm hopeful that that's the message we're communicating to the community, and that's the approach that we're taking as a Board of Education.
Mike, I will absolutely agree with you that it was a starting point, that we were going to start looking at a longer-term plan, that it would include potentially a referendum that addressed many needs. And I think we went as far as, at that point, I don't think we knew at our fingertips when we were eligible really to go for another bond. And I believe you were here already asked, maybe it was your predecessor, that said that it was 2028. The other point that I want to echo that you said, I do think we need to look at now that we do have the property to the east of Pascack Hills. Does that provide, I know you said it, but I'll repeat it, a third or a fourth option to do something sooner rather than later, because it's where the gym is, right? Am I wrong? It's right to the right, so maybe we can do something there. And I think we should at least look at that. And it wouldn't be throwaway work anyway, because whether we do it sooner or we wait for this potential bond, we need to know if that's an option and what it would be.
The last question that I'll ask, and my hope is that this becomes a board goal, is that if we are looking to do something, that we start planning for that. And I think that work touches each committee. Like, there's definitely a curricular aspect to this. Like, how are we using our spaces? If the reality is that we're not finishing or we're not going forward with the work on a referendum until 2030, like, what is the world going to look like in 6 to 8 years and beyond? And are our current spaces currently meeting those needs? Or will they meet those needs? And when you look at the long-term facility plan, there are things on there like media centers and other big ticket items that, are we going to be able to fund that in a regular budget? It sounds like the way things are trending, that may become more difficult over time. From a finance perspective, obviously that needs to go to finance committee. From an equity perspective, are we making sure that everyone's needs are being met equally? And then from a facilities perspective, obviously, they would be deep in those discussions. So I think it would be helpful to understand, going backwards, what type of timeline would exist in order to start planning so that we're taking advantage of planning and voting and work so that we are doing it in the most efficient use of time and things aren't getting pushed off to 2029 and 2030. So a timeline would be helpful.
Mike, if I can add, you may have inferred this, but I'll call it out specifically. As Yas pointed out at the Finance Committee, our enrollment is down. However, the signs from the sending districts that's going to reverse. So what in the next, I don't know, it might be 10 years, but still, to your point, we need to look at what we expect our population to be. And you can't drive more than 2 blocks in this community without seeing some housing development go up. So that has to be factored into whatever we do.
I'd like to comment on Mike's idea about the fundraising report. I don't know what a realistic, I don't know what discussion you had, but a realistic timeline for getting all of the clubs to come forward with the amount of fundraising they do. It seems to be quite a task. I don't know how many clubs activities we have, and I'm sure there's a lot between the 2 high schools. I can tell you on my level, for me to come up with the clubs that I have, how much fundraising I do, it's based upon so many variables. It's kind of like a difficult number to come up with, because there's stuff that you fundraise for, then there's replaceables, there's wear and tear. At any given moment, I may have to do a bake sale or some kind of fundraiser to raise money just to replace things. So I don't know if you're going to get really a realistic down to the dollar number. I suppose an estimate would be the best, and it would be very general at that.
I mean, those monies are going into and out of student activities, I would imagine. And my thinking is more in terms of like, really, how much are we asking families to pay out of pocket? And then what monies are being raised to offset that out-of-pocket cost, if any? And I would think every sport or extracurricular would be able to reflect on their own practices over a given year to say, this is what we ask for students to provide out of pocket, and this is how much that we raise to offset cost, and really just to identify inequities, because that's something that was articulated to us by a parent as justification. So to be able to understand that as a board from big picture.
Okay, I'm just concerned that maybe a club or an activity that becomes a standard, because some of them are variable, and we have to understand that. I just don't want it to become, well, that's it then, you know? That was my only concern on that.
So, Mike, I'll just pop in there. So I know that for the soccer team, right? So they do fundraising, but you know, it all depends on the parents and how often they want to get involved. So we have, you know, a dinner at the end of the year, right, which most do, and we have to put in money for that. It depends where you're going to host it and what you're going to serve. If you're just going to serve chicken fingers and French fries, is pretty cheap. So yeah, so I don't know if, you know, the football team, I think, goes a little bit more overboard. So I think it just depends on the club and the activity itself as to how much they're going to raise and what they want to use it for. If they want a big dinner or not, or trophies, or everybody gets a trophy, right?
Mike, can I just bring up another, kind of to piggyback what you said before? Even in town, you do hear talk about the inequities with the use of the fields. And I do think it's important that we look to our own towns prior to letting outside groups come in. And I know that the rates are different, but I do think that's important. So if that's something we can monitor, I'm sure it is monitored to a certain extent, but they should get, people who live in our communities that are paying the taxes for these fields should have first access.
Right, so Wycliffe Lake does that. So I was the Park and Rec director for 6.5 years and monitored and did the whole thing with the field. So, you know, baseball, softball, they would all get priority. And if we had any slots that were vacant and somebody wanted to rent them, then that's fine. But the kids would always get priority.
Maybe just seeing, I mean, I know that's not an answer we can get right now, but seeing the time frame before it gets open to outside organizations might be helpful. I'm sure that's not something anybody can answer right now.
Yeah. And again, that was feedback that came to me from another organization, so. And then the last question I have is just, we talked about Hills Auditorium. Do we have a projected timeline on when we are going to work to address the Pascack Valley Auditorium? What anticipated budget will that be a part of?
That's a discussion I have to have with Robert and the architect, find out what the timeline is, especially since what's going to happen with Hills, and then when do we do Valley. We do have, right now, we have 1.3 million allocated or set aside for Valley. Obviously, it's going to increase. We won't have the asbestos abatement issue, but we will have, obviously, increase in costs with the lighting and the sound.
And that's already accounted for and put aside. Okay.
What may be prudent is to actually, depending on when we're going to do it, if we're going to do it in 25, 26, right? Because we're going into 24, 25, it may be prudent just to cancel it, put it in the budget for 25, 26 at the right amount or a better estimate. So that's something that may be in play. Doesn't mean the project's not going to happen. It just means it's going to be canceled, frees up the capital reserve, and then we'll put it in the budget for 25, 26, and they can get going right after, basically right after school.
So that work then could start in July 25.
Theoretically.
Yes. Yeah, I was trying to figure out the date. But yeah, that's quite a possibility. So that's a discussion we have to have with the architect and Robert and most likely Mr. Puccio.
Great. And then maybe one clarifying point in the February 23rd Friday update. Again, when we're talking about the girls' locker room at Hills, there was a reference made to all extra capital allocate discretionary capital funds with no new projects being considered. So I didn't understand that, again, because I thought we were looking at the girls' locker room as part of a bigger referendum project in the future. So if maybe we can get clarification on that February 23rd comment in the next Friday update, that would be appreciated.
I can speak to some of that. So for the facility use, and I don't have it right in front of me, but we have a tiered system for facility use that does prioritize our school-based groups first, then our township-based groups, then community groups. So if there's a violation of that, those calendars are typically overseen by the athletic directors, and then it goes through Robert's office and also the principals. So if you know of someone who's not following that policy, if you could just let that chain of command know, or reach out to Yas and I directly to let us know what that is, because I'm not aware of that, and no one had brought that to our attention. But we do have that in our policy. So, to all of your points, that is definitely what we would want to be seeing happen. For the booster costs, it has been, as Jim alluded to, looking at athletics and looking at extracurriculars we're able to find two different accuracies, I would say. We have a lot more accuracy when it comes to athletic boosters, less accuracy when it comes to the extracurricular clubs, and that really is due to variability. Even within the athletic boosters, there's a number of variables, largely dependent on how active kind of the current classes and what their goals are for fundraising. So all of the fundraising needs to have a goal. But we have that, and I think that we had last left it that we were going to have a presentation from the athletic directors at a finance committee meeting throughout the budget process. So that has not yet been scheduled because we're still kind of fine-tuning that data, but that is something that we do plan to report out on. And then the comment in the February 23rd update where we talked about the girls' locker room. At some point back in, I'd have to look at the date, but at some point the facility committee had actually moved to allocate any capital funds that came into our possession, so to speak, towards that project, with the hope that we could build some reserves the same way that we did with the auditoriums. If we're looking at the realistic opportunities here, I think we need to be setting aside funds, but at the same time looking at building that into a larger referendum. So that was a decision that had come out of the facility committee, that we were going to be allocating any surplus basically towards this project before we considered any other new projects. That is the way it seems we have done these big projects within our normal budget in the past, the auditoriums being like a very salient example of that. We built up surplus until we had enough to move forward with both projects.
I'm confused by that, just because it was even referenced that the reason we were presenting to the full board was because the full facilities committee wasn't at the December 2022 meeting, I believe it was. I think just Mr. Blundo and I were there, and it was in the, if I remember correctly from my notes, it was in the media center of the Pascack Hills. So how much extra capital has been reserved for the auditorium, for the locker room project?
So what we're talking about is the funds, and Mr. Tummy, I'll definitely let you speak to that, but what we're looking at is this idea that our capital goes towards necessary repairs and then also towards these renovation projects. So we have not allocated funds towards any other renovation projects since that conversation was had. What that total is right now, I'm not sure, because I'm not sure if we actually have I know we don't have the surplus yet from this year, and I'm not sure what was allocated from last year total to that.
Yeah, we'll have to get that number. I mean, a lot of things came up. Part of it was the purchase of properties. So the purchase of the property in Montvale, and also the purchase of property, hopefully for the Milestones house. So some of that would go away from the surplus. But we're right now, Cindy and I are going through calculations to come up with the number.
But I think realistically, we're not looking at that project as something that will happen through the budgeting process.
That's correct. I mean, when you look at it realistically, it has to be part of a larger referendum. And that's something that's quite evident when Solutions made their presentation at the other meeting. And that's why Solutions also mentioned the fact that, you can't go out for a referendum just for a locker room, that you have to incorporate a lot of things, especially something with educational value. So you and Mr. Belindo, absolutely correct. We had talked about this a while ago, that if it does become a referendum, it has to be part of a bigger referendum, which a lot of constituents will have so-called skin in the game. So that's why we're starting to have these meetings and start talking and looking at the existing long-range facility plan that we do internally. And also, my suggestion to administration was, okay, think about other things that you may want to have, and not just in the next couple of years. We're talking more like 5 to 8 years down the road, kind of looking at a bigger picture. So I think that is very, very important, that we look more at a bigger picture, how it's going to serve the district and serve it very well. And as you say, it has to be equal. It can't just be one school. It has to be both schools that get this. And believe me, both schools could use other things. So a referendum incorporating many needs is vital.
I want to go back to some of the field usage issues and some of the club issues and the finances of the clubs that operate. Several years ago, and I brought this up last year, we had a committee that addressed these type of things, and it was made up of the athletic directors, a VP at each school, and then board members. And we had dialogue around these things. What clubs are coming into existence? What's the finance, how are we raising funds for our shortages? Where do we have inequities? That went by the wayside, and I'll hold myself accountable because I was one of the people that agreed to get rid of that because we weren't getting anything substantial out of it for a couple of years. But I think we should consider reinstituting that so that we have a regular dialogue, board members, with the athletic directors, with the vice principals about the clubs and the activities. Field usage would come up at those meetings as well, so that some of these questions can be addressed on a more timely basis than have to do it in front of the full board and a full reporting. Just a suggestion.
Yeah, I want to second that idea. I remember being on that committee when we had it. It was valuable. And yeah, it did go by the wayside because, I think COVID and all the other committees coming on. But definitely it would be worthwhile to look into forming that committee again. I mean, it could be even more expansive because now there's a whole issue on equity and, we want to do that. I would even say even activities like the plays and things like that could come into that as well. Any kind of, robotics and everything else.
And we had regularly scheduled meetings, even if there was nothing urgent, because it was a dialogue between those
Right.
folks and the board. We didn't have to have an issue in front of us, and a lot of things became organically generated through conversations at that committee. So,
And it was also a window in to see what our students are doing outside of the classroom. It was
Yes.
really, a very positive experience. So.
Any other old business?
I am. Just a shout out to the robotics team. That was an awesome reveal night at the Hills. I think it was on February 27th. It was fantastic. Great job to students, the teachers, the staff, anyone who was involved in that. It was a beautiful night. Great turnout.
Yeah, I'd like to agree with that. I thought it was the first time they were doing it in that particular way. I think I remember them saying, and it was really nicely done. Very interesting and just really cool. Okay, next let's move on to new business. Any new business?
So I have something. So I have been speaking with the Environmental Club, Brooke Schwartzman, with regards to the Wycliffe Lake Reservoir cleanup. If anybody travels that way across the reservoir into Hillsdale, They know that a lot of trash comes down from Rockland County and settles right in the corner by the train station. So it's a bane of our existence, especially when there's been a storm. So the town used to do cleanups, and I believe they're going to start doing some. But I thought that it would be great to get the school kids involved for, maybe some community service hours. Kids always need those. So we're looking possibly to do it in April or May with the help of Veolia, who is the water company that handles the reservoir. And I just wanted to say that they've been really helpful, and they actually do tours as well of the facility. So I'm going to let Brooke know that, so that maybe she could organize something for any of the kids that wanted to go up there. We just need a bus. And they spend about an hour and a half up there, and then they walk around the reservoir to kind of get an idea of how it kind of works. So that's really cool. I'm really excited about that. And then the other question I had was about taxes, school taxes, and about how it works with all the surrounding towns. So most recently, Woodcliff Lake folks got another assessment, and it went up by quite a lot, and it was the same last year. So a couple of people have asked me to ask that question. I'm not sure how it works. I'm not sure, so if maybe that's an offline discussion or not, I'm not sure. But if you could shed any light on that, it would be great.
Yeah, we have nothing to do with it. It's the state, so you'd have to ask the state. I know I had a councilman reach out to me a couple of years ago, and I explained to him that we don't have anything to do with it. The state gives us percent allocation among the 4 towns, and that's how we divide the taxes. I know a lot of it has to do with valuation or home sales, and then there are other factors involved, but that is something that the state comes up with. I don't know what sources they use, but I kind of pointed that person to at least start here and see what you can get, because we've never had any luck.
I'll just add that it is a state law, right? So it's not something that's just made up by the Department of Education. The state law actually defines the funding formula. And Yas is correct that it is valuation, relative valuation, what a house is valued in Woodcliff Lake versus the average versus Hillsdale versus Rivervale and Montvale. There are other factors in there, one of which is enrollment. So it is factored in. Some people believe that it should just be a straight per student cost divided by the number of students, but that is not what the law prescribes. So there's only 2 ways to really change it that I know of, and I do have a little expertise in this, but I am not an expert. The first is to get the state law changed, right, and to work on the Assembly and the Senate of the state to have them change the way the funding formula is currently constructed. And the second is by a vote of the 4 towns, that each town individually has to agree to change our local agreement. If one town votes it down, it doesn't happen. So, and that was attempted about 10 years ago, and it failed in two of the 4 towns in Hillsdale and Rivervale, which killed it. So Yas is correct that we as a board have no authority in it. The only reason I have a little expertise is because I was on the other side for a while.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'll piggyback on both of those very smart comments, because it is actually difficult sometimes to get answers from the state as to the mechanics of it. But I can make the comment that our tax levy for schools is set at a 2% increase. There's some exceptions to that 2% increase, including for increased healthcare costs. Our increase for Pascack Valley Regional is looking like it's going to be about 2.4%. So even if as an individual homeowner you're paying more taxes, or a region is paying, like one of the townships is paying more or paying less, that total amount is unchanged. So it's not like, there's not a way for this to be a game where reassessments happen and then the school gets more money. That's not how the formula works. The formula is a flat, what is our exact increase? 2.4. Thank you. 2.4. I didn't want to say publicly the wrong number. So our tax increase is a flat 2.47. How that gets distributed to individual taxpayers is the formula that's set by the state. And I think sometimes when people see their taxes increased by more than 2.47%, there's confusion over it. That confusion likely is over either the assessed value, or I shouldn't say the assessed value, that's the wrong term, what the state has said that their contribution value is, or other taxes that are added in. Because we're a regional, you're also receiving a tax levy from the sending districts, but I can say that our sending districts are in the same position. I don't believe that anybody is going above the 2.47. And I could be a little bit off by that by a tenth or a hundredth of a percentage point, but generally speaking, you're looking at only a 2% increase that is going directly to schools. Anything above that is not coming to us. So I think that's something to keep in mind as well. I would definitely ask township and state officials. I would ask the township, what is the impact of a more aggressive reassessment policy? Because we can't necessarily speak to that, but I would think that the townships could, because I believe that there are some townships in our area that have less frequent reassessments. And so that's something that is really set by the townships that I would certainly, and I know that you followed up with the townships, but I think that's something that is a question for them, because we can't necessarily address that, but I think it's a smart question and a good question to ask. And I'm sorry that we actually, Mr. Usami and I actually looked to see if we could get someone to speak to this, and we can't. So we did try. So it's, when you deal with the bureaucracy of, the state, they're pretty set, and they're not necessarily open to having a conversation. But thank you.
Okay, any other new business? Okay, next we're going to move on to comments from the public. This does not have to be on agenda items. Anyone here? No. And we don't need another executive session. So just adjournment, I believe, right? Okay, a second? Oh, okay, we're adjourned.